Welcome to Soft Talk. Today's presentation is titled Nepal Needs a Strategy for Survival. We will talk about this need for strategy for survival for the country later on after building on concepts such as long peace, the long peace, bipolarity, capitalist peace, and nuclear deterrence. Not necessarily in that order. Welcome to the program. Let's talk first about long peace, the long peace, rather, is the period of long peace marked by the absence of major wars between great powers. Since when? Since the end of World War II, that is 1945. Is this period of long peace coming to an end? What do the latest developments in countries and regions, countries in particular, such as Venezuela, Syria, Iraq, Ukraine, Palestine, Iran, Greenland, and our very own backyard? You see, having subcontinent-size countries as your backyard, as your neighbors, has its unique disadvantages. What does that indicate? What do these developments indicate? What factors, developments are giving rise to yet another crisis in a world where humans across generations, humans have spent a large portion of recorded history fighting war or fleeing to save their dear lives, along with that of their near and dear ones. Data suggests that only 8% of our recorded history, that is around 268 years out of 3,400 years, has been truly peaceful. You see, so war is our second nature, it seems. Now let's have a look at factors contributing to the long peace. They are nuclear deterrence, economic interdependence through trade, the spread of what else but democracy, the United Nations role, increased human rights education, stable borders, and shifting cultural norms that value life, bipolarity, and capitalist peace. The United Nations comes to mind, doesn't it? Does it not come to mind as the League of Nations 2.0? I wonder. But let's continue instead of poking fun at the United Nations. Okay? Nuclear deterrence. The Carnegie Council for Ethics in International Affairs. This is dedicated to Dale Carnegie. You must have heard about this fellow, How to Win Friends and Influence People. That is his famous book. This council, the Carnegie Council for Ethics in International Affairs, defines nuclear deterrence as a principle in international relations where the retaliatory potential, remember, the retaliatory potential and destructive force of nuclear weapons prevents nations from launching a nuclear attack. However, there are questions, naturally, as to whether nuclear deterrence is sufficient, effective, just, or even ethical. Then comes bipolarity. It is the global system with two nuclear-powered superpowers at the helm, like the United States and the then USSR during the Cold War period, that is from 1945 up till 1989. While the United States led the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, that is NATO, the USSR led the Warsaw Pact. These blocs they presided over a tenuous peace the world over for quite some time, from 1945 till 1989. However, with the disintegration of the USSR on December 26, 1991, that is a day after the Christmas of 1991, the division of the world into two rival blocs ended, giving the United States considerable leeway for the expansion of NATO into Russia's neighborhood. It gave the NATO the leeway for the expansion of uh, this NATO into Russia's literally own backyard, with the inclusion of reunified Germany after the collapse of the Berlin Wall in 1990s. Poland, Hungary, and the Czech Republic, Bulgaria, I think, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Romania, Slovakia, Slovenia, Albania, Croatia, Montenegro, and North Macedonia. All these countries became part of NATO. They are like literally in the backyard of Russia. It's a huge country. Uh, so they all joined the North Atlantic Treaty Organization after the collapse of this Warsaw Pact and after the collapse of the Soviet Union. These expansion, the NATO expanded from 1990 till 2020, but its plan to just bring Ukraine on board stalled. It got stalled, and we all know the developments in Ukraine these days. The war between Russia and Ukraine, or rather, the war between NATO and Russia, whichever way you take it. Then comes capitalist peace. This concept holds that free markets, trade, and economic interdependence nurture peace between countries by increasing the costs of war, promoting mutual interests and incentivizing cooperation over conflict, making capitalist countries less likely to fight each other. This less likely to fight each other does not mean that democratic countries, even democratic countries, clash over their trade interests. Key mechanisms for capitalist peace are the high opportunity cost of disrupting mutually profitable trade. Now, for smaller countries like Nepal, there is no such thing called mutually profitable trade. Trust built through contractual relations. Trust also is vanishing like a chimera in these troubling times. Trust built through contractual relations and reduce incentives for the conquest of the land, of the territory, when wealth comes through innovation and exchange and not through the capture of territories. Meanwhile, much water has flown down the Hudson in the United States, which remains as the sole superpower presiding over a rules-based international order amid the decline, amid its own decline and the rise of a multipolar world order. 45 individuals have served 47 presidencies spanning 64-year terms since April 30, 1789. This is the White House, and this is, you know who that figure, who this famous figure is, the 47th President of the United States, none other than Donald J. Trump. On September 5, 2025, Donald J. Trump, the 47th President, as I told you earlier, signed an executive order changing the Department of Defense's name to the Department of War as a secondary title. Quite significant, isn't it? Does it not indicate, does this renaming of the Department of Defense as the Department of War, does it not signify the shifting priorities of the sole superpower of the world? That it is prioritizing war in these like tense times. The 200th presidential order of Donald J. Trump authorizes Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth and Department of Defense subordinate officials to use secondary titles like Department of War, Secretary of War, and Deputy Secretary of War in public communications, official correspondence, ceremonial contexts, and non-statutory documents with the executive branch, according to a fact sheet of the White House. Additionally, this order directs all executive agencies and departments to recognize and accommodate these secondary titles in internal and external communications, as well as instructing Hegseth, the Defense Secretary, to recommend actions, including executive and legislative actions, that would be required to permanently rename the department. So they are thinking of renaming, there are plans, in fact, to rename the Department of Defense as the Department of War. This quite clearly points at the priorities of the United States in these difficult times. Amid the rise of our giant neighbors along with Russia, the re-emergence of our giant neighbors along with Russia and their increasing presence in the immediate neighborhood and much beyond, including in Latin America. Thucydides, considered the father of the school of political realism, seems to be proving from his grave the relevance of his trap, even in this day and age. Indeed, the Thucydides trap refers to the natural, inevitable discombobulation that occurs when a rising power threatens to displace a ruling power and when a rising power where this occurs, this Thucydides trap, it refers to the natural, inevitable discombobulation that occurs when a rising power threatens to displace a ruling power. Uh, the resulting structure. When this occurs, when a rising power threatens to displace a ruling power, the resulting structural stress makes a violent clash the rule and not the exception. How will a fragile and strategically located country, I'm talking about Nepal, obviously, which almost collapsed within 48 hours of a youth-led protest. This fragile state almost collapsed within 48 hours of a youth-led, faceless, as they call it, protest. How will such a fragile state cope with these challenges, cope with the challenges that come with this emerging world order? How will this country be able to defend herself and protect her core interests as powers worth their names fight viciously for dominance in her backyard and much beyond? That is a key question, isn't it? Let's ponder over this question. It's time for all of us to ponder over this question. How will this fragile country survive these hard times, this shifting geopolitical and geostrategic landscape? That is a question. That is the only important question we should be pondering over as we just stand at a crossroads in the life of this country. Will weak and famished cats spread in the immediate neighborhood and beyond be able to survive by standing together against their far, against their mightier species on the prowl, even as the peacemaker cat continues to mew from the banks of the Hudson, albeit feebly? It's time for national forces like the leaders of political parties making a beeline for talks at a foreign capital, the deposed monarch, government ministers, experts, bureaucrats, and exceptionally competent generals of Bhadrakali who know geopolitics and geostrategy like the back of their hands and who behave as if the world were their own oyster, as their nuggets of wisdom spread through YouTube and other forums suggest, to come together and devise a strategy for survival. I repeat, it's time for national forces like the leaders of political parties making a beeline for talks at a foreign capital, the deposed monarch, government ministers, experts, bureaucrats, and exceptionally competent generals of Bhadrakali who know geopolitics and geostrategy like the back of their hands as their nuggets of wisdom spread through YouTube and other forums suggest, to come together and devise a strategy for survival for this country. With this remark, I wrap up this edition of Soft Talk. Thank you for watching and thank you for listening.